Hello and welcome back to my course. Today we will create a example for routes on how to create routes in Angular. But first of all, as you can see here in the app routing.module.ts, this is the file that I generated earlier in the first course wherein the Angular asked me if I wanted to add some routes for the project. And when I clicked yes, it automatically generated an app-routing.module.ts. So this is where I'm gonna create routes and import some files in it and import some dependencies in it rather. So to start, um, I'm gonna create some routes in here. In order to create routes, basically this const routes is automatically generated together with this app-routing.module.ts file. So what we should do here is we will just basically add a path for our component that we're going to use or um, we're going to show to the user in the browser. So what we should do first is we add a bracket, and then we add a comma if ever we wanted to add some new paths. So first we're gonna type in path and then followed by a double single quote, wherein this means that um, if the URL doesn't have any specified path, it will just basically redirect it to the associated component, wherein in this case, it's gonna be component home component. Okay, then we will save it. And then for the next path, it should be about. Then we'll add a component wherein it's gonna be the about component that we still basically didn't generate. So for now, we have to generate the about component. So we should type in ng generate component about. Okay. Then as you can see here, we can use the quick fix in order to import the about component, and then we will save it. And then going back to our about component, we will edit the HTML and CSS code inside it. And for that, um, for our HTML code, what we will do is we will create a div with a class of about dash container, where in this class, we will use this later to connect a CSS styles for this HTML document. And then I'm just gonna put a header about us and then generate some random text on it. So if you type in lorem, it's just gonna basically give you a random example text, and then I'll type in lorem again. Then I will save it. Then in our about.component.css, I'm gonna use its class and then save it. Then customize the width to be 800 pixels, margin with 0 auto, and then padding with 50 pixels. And then for the header tag, we're gonna do a font size equals to 36 pixels, text align center, and margin bottom to be 30 pixels, and then we will save that. And for our p tag, we're gonna basically just put a font size for 10 pixels, line height for 1.5, and then margin bottom 20 pixels. Then after customizing our about page, we will basically go to our app component .html and comment this out. And instead of using the app dash about, what we will do now is use the router outlet, wherein this basically allows us to use the path that we customize in our app dash routing dot module dot ts. And then um, afterwards, in our about component, we can add some extra methods in here for your preference, but for now I will just keep it that way. I will keep it as is because our goal here is to just display and um, go into some paths that we created. So for that, I'm gonna use ng serve, and basically I didn't create a home component because our home component is already existing in here. And if you can see it, it also has the contents of our API calls. So it's gonna be a conflict if I create it again. So we just need to use this for now. And then if I go to our server, and now as you can see, the server is now up and running. And in this view for our website, it is redirected to our home component if the path for the URL is blank. As you can see in here, the localhost 4200 has a blank path. But if we try to put the about, it's gonna give us the same exact HTML file that we added here in our about.html. Then if we just like randomly type localhost 4200, it's basically gonna redirect us to our home page because we set it up to be like that in our routes here in the app-routing.module.ts. But what if we change this into our table component? Then we save it. So instead of redirecting us into our home.component.html, we are now redirected to our table component.html, wherein if I just type localhost 4200 slash about, it's basically gonna put us again into the about page. But what I wanted to do and what I wanted to try is to redirect it all the time in the home component if I don't have any specified path for my URL, and create a new path for my table component wherein it's going to be table for the path. Then if I save it, it's now accessible because we tried to expose the table component for our user interface. So as you can see, um, using the routes in Angular is very helpful instead of doing this like adding app-home or app two-way data binding, wherein you have to edit all of your components in here and add it one by one if you're gonna edit it here in your browser so that you can see the changes if you're gonna edit the CSS or if you're gonna edit the HTML file of your component. But as you can see, if we just use the router outlet and then declare our paths and assign it to a component in our app dash routing dot module dot ts, it's going to be easier for you to access each components in your website, and then you can see how it changed, how does the CSS affected it, and it's gonna be much more flexible because you can just basically create a component and type in a new path here, like for example, navbar path. If you wanted to edit the navbar, then you add a component for your navbar. You can just basically do that every time you create a new component. For me, in my experience, And what I do, I always use router outlet before I start creating some other components in my Angular project. I always automatically add the routes in here if I create a new component because um, it's easier for me to edit because what I'm going to do now is I'm just gonna type in the path that I specified in here, wherein I'm still going to use these routes on my um, future code. So why not put it as early as you can, and it will help you be efficient in creating your project. But as a tip for me, I always add the app that dash routing.module.ts before creating the project. Like if you can remember in the earlier part of this course, the Angular asked us if we wanted to add routing for our project. I always tick yes on that one because if I don't tick yes to it, I have to create this app this routing dot module dot ts manually, and wherein that file is just gonna be like this, pure blank, and you will have a hard time importing the ng module, the router module, dash routes if you're still new to Angular. But if you're gonna tick yes for that question of the Angular, it's basically gonna generate you all of this line of codes in here, specifically the ng module, its imports and its exports, and its import for the router module and the routes and the ng module. Basically, this import helps Angular to import the routes that you created. Basically, the router module reads all of these routes as the specific routes that you're going to use for each of your components that is created. For example, in the About page, in the About component, you basically created an About path wherein the Angular reads it. Oh, okay. About path is for the About component. Table path is for the table component, and navbar path is for the navbar component, wherein it's easier to do it here in Angular, for my opinion and for my experience. It's basically much easier for me to handle routing and navigation if I'm using the Angular framework because Angular will help you or the developers to have a much easier time and spend less time in creating this kind of logic or line of code, then it will give a better efficiency for the developers to finish the assigned task for them, especially if it's already existing into some modules here in Angular. It will drastically change the pace that developer can code and will help the developer to create a much better version of the code. And that will be all for this routes example, and see you for the next example and demo. Thank you.